Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk just for a few moments on something that I find rather fascinating um, and interesting, in a good and sometimes in a sad way, and that is when it comes to the value of records, the value of antiques, the value of so much, and also the social and basically the cultural liking for many of these things. The world has gone through a massive shift, and a lot of it has to do with the internet. I have been collecting since 1968, 1969, and well, that's a few years ago. It's 50 years. And in those 50 years of collecting, I have watched the hobby. I've watched the prices, I've watched the values, I've watched the interest all change. Now, when I was a boy, when I started collecting in the early days, the thing that was amazing to me was how expensive things were and how rare things were. Because where could you find things? At a flea market, at an antique shop? Put an ad in the newspaper and maybe one or two people might respond. That's it. I can tell you that in 1972, I was working at an antique shop. Now, this is a long, long time ago. We're talking nearly 50 years ago. And I was a kid, teenager. And I worked for this woman by the name of Nancy Esposito. Long gone now. And Nancy Esposito had an antique shop, and antique shops were all over the place years ago. If you remember, they were everywhere because that's where you could find this stuff. And it was rare. And occasionally you would see like a phonograph, or you'd see a mechanical music box or singing birds that you'd wind up, and etc. And these things were just precious and rare because you didn't see it. And so I worked for her. I made $1 a day. That was my salary. $1 a day. And then she showed me the holiest of holies. She had a Victrola. And I was amazed by it. And she had two, count them, Caruso records. Now, I already had 4 Caruso records at this point. I was really, they were, and I was stupid enough in 1971 to trade a Philco Cathedral radio for a Caruso record because I thought that Caruso records were one of the rarest things in the world. My mother told me, she said, oh, they're very rare. And everybody told me how rare Carusos were and how valuable they were. I didn't know. I was just learning. And so I happened to save up and purchase a Philco Cathedral radio. Beautiful thing. I paid $10 for it. Goodly amount of money. And then through that Philco radio, an artist that I knew by the name of Bill Brockway, he had a Caruso record. And I was like, whoa, a real Caruso record. And so I traded the radio for it. You know something? I'm willing to make an offer right now. I will give 10 Caruso records for a Philco Cathedral radio. I think that's pretty fair. But I went and worked for this lady, Nancy Esposito. And she had 2 Caruso records. I just could not afford 2. But she wanted $25 a piece. And I said, well, that's pretty dear. So I worked for a whole month. And I bought this record. I thought I was doing pretty good. Of course, over the years, I've made markings on the back In the 1980s, I decided to put all the information about records on the back. And then, of course, I documented the whole thing about buying it many, many years later because I figured it's good to tell the history. And of course, today with the internet, with eBay, you discover how many records there are. Type in Edison phonograph and discover how many cylinder machines there are, how many Victrolas, etc. There's hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of them. And today, because of the plethora of machines, and also most collectors are older, it's all changed. Prices have gone down, values have gone down, the desire to have many of these things have gone down. And that's where we stand today. It's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing in the 50 years that I have been collecting that we've gone from one massive extreme to another massive extreme. And, a lot of it had to do with Japan. The Japanese went phonograph and record crazy. I remember years ago, I would buy like a bunch of phonographs and then I'd sell them to Japan for twice, 3 times what I paid for them. And they were jumping at it. They couldn't buy the stuff fast enough. Of course, that's all over. And I think a lot of the fact of many of the machines becoming so valuable had a lot to do with the Japanese market. So here I am with my $25 record, which probably $1972 in today's money is a frightening amount of money I paid for this record. Of course, Philco radios are pretty expensive too these days, so I made 2 big boo-boos there, but that was the beginnings of my collecting. I didn't know. I was a kid. There wasn't anyone there really to tell you that stuff. Within a year or 2 of this record, I would start to meet lots of people, and I got to meet Ted Spangenberg and got Don Donahue and lots of other people who set me straight on a lot of this stuff. But I'm sure you all have these stories of those early days of collecting when these things were worth their weight in gold. Thank you.